Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We appreciate you joining us today. Our topic today is rights-based dementia care, and we have a wonderful speaker. I'll tell you about her in just a few minutes. These complimentary webinars are brought to you through a collaboration of sponsorship with O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, and Alzheimer's Orange County. And I'm Kim Bailey, and I'm a gerontologist here at Alzheimer's Orange County. I will be your host today. Our sponsors are providing these webinars to you as a service to the community on topics that are beneficial for anyone who cares for or works with older adults. We hope you find today's presentation especially informative and useful. Today, our presenter is going to be Dr. Jennifer Carson. And before I introduce her, let me just go over a few tips about what you need to know if you want to earn CE credit. So we do have available today RCFE, BRN, and CAMP under the BBS umbrella. You must be online for 60 minutes, logged in at the start of the webinar. You must have access to both audio and visual computer elements. Please don't share your unique link with anyone else. It's your unique record of attendance. And if you do share your link or use someone else's link to join, you're not going to be able to receive CE credit. There are a series of poll questions. Please answer them immediately. They are proof of your attendance for CE credit. If for any reason you have technical difficulties with answering the poll questions, simply go ahead and put your response into the chat box so that you can get credit. Please complete and return the survey immediately as you exit the webinar today. You will only receive a survey link by email in 24 hours if you do not complete the survey when exiting today. A certificate of completion will be issued to you via email within 10 days of your completed survey being received. Basics for everyone, your mic and your video are automatically disabled. That doesn't mean you can't ask questions. We will reserve some time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A with Dr. Carson, so you can type your questions into the chat box, and I will ask those questions of Dr. Carson later, as I said. We won't be responding to raised hands, so that is disabled as well. Okay, so now let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Carson. She is a clinical associate professor and founding director of the Dementia Engagement, Education, and Research Program in the School of Public Health at the University of Nevada at Reno. In addition to other grant-funded initiatives, the DEAR program provides an administrative home for Dementia-Friendly Nevada, with Jennifer serving as its director. In this role, she engages diverse communities to promote brain health and enhance dementia support. With extensive field experience and a commitment to participatory research, Jennifer also partners on Nevada's CDC-funded BOLD public health program. She received the Mensa Foundation Laura Joyner Award in 2022 and the UNR Foundation Established Innovator Award in 2024 for her transformative work in dementia care and support. So we are thrilled to have Dr. Carson with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn everything over to you, Dr. Carson.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
And thank you, Lauren, as well, for having me here. And I always like to share whenever I'm with my peeps in the OC. I'm a Orange County native, born and raised, so it feels good to be back with my peeps, even virtually. So, well, I'm looking forward to today's exploration. These are our learning opportunities for today. I'm going to introduce the principles of rights-based dementia care, making an assumption that some of this content might be new to most of you. I know that it's relatively new content, even for me. I'm currently working on a book that addresses human rights and dementia. And so this has been a real opportunity for me over the last couple of years to really learn more. And so I'm excited to share some of that learning with you. I'm going to introduce a couple of frameworks for thinking about human rights and dementia. And these frameworks are going to help us focus on the rights, dignity, and autonomy of individuals living with dementia. And then we're going to jump into an exploration of some really important and not well known legal and ethical considerations for dementia inclusion. This will be a kind of a friendly critique of some of our practices today, practices that I have been a part of myself. And so more on that soon. But first, I want to say a few words about this incredibly provocative photo on the right of the slide. This is a photo taken by a friend of mine, Matt Perry, back in 2013 when he was a journalist with the California Health Report, a publication some of you may be familiar with. And the photo that you see here is of his mother, who lived in a memory care community in the state of Connecticut. Interestingly, back in 2013, I was working for a standalone memory care operator in the state of Connecticut. This was not taken at the community where I worked, but I just wanted to provide for a little bit of context that as Matt was making this critique in the California Health Report, I was at that time a provider of memory care myself. But I want to share Matt's words with you. The photo you see to your right is one I took of my mom only a month before she died. The facility purportedly offered memory care, but my siblings and I knew this was largely a joke. And then he goes on, he writes a bit, and then he describes this photo. With the help of a staffer, we opened the gate and bumped her wheelchair down the 5 steps onto the grass. As I wheeled my mother forward, the wind hit her face and she recoiled. And then she did something simple but marvelous. She looked up, her eyes suddenly alert. Finally, my mom was there with me. Then she commanded me very clearly, over there. I want to go over there. I wheeled her over the grass to the spot in the photo. This sick, frail, elderly woman then reached up to the iron fence, pulled herself out of her wheelchair, and began rattling it. That is when I took this photo. And what rang in my head at this moment were the words of Dr. Peter Reed, who incidentally is my husband in a full circle moment here. Dr. Reed said, "The way we treat older adults in this society borrows more from the prison system than it does from the healthcare system." We are on the precipice of disaster, writes Matt. We can either follow the visionaries who seek to redefine aging or continue to treat and imprison our parents and our grandparents in their bodies and in our facilities. So thank you, Matt, for sharing your story and this photo of your mother with us. I feel like it sets a pretty powerful stage for the topic at hand, rights-based dementia care. Before I jump in, I want to make a couple of acknowledgments here to my partners. We are writing a book on this topic. Know that this is not a commercial endorsement because we haven't actually written the book. It's not available for sale, but we are working hard to write on this topic, a friendly critique of memory care. This is Dr. Al Power, author of the books Dementia Beyond Drugs, Dementia Beyond Disease, a dear friend of mine, a real learning partner. And this book might be Dementia Beyond Segregation by the time we're done with it. And we are working in partnership with an incredible former CEO of Carol Woods Retirement Community in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Pat Sprigg. She was a real leader in the restraint-free movement. And in her leadership at Carol Woods, for over 30 years where she served as CEO, that very large continuing care retirement community, 500 residents, not a single locked door. The residents who lived there, moved through the levels of care, but based on their medical needs, not their cognitive abilities. And so she's an incredible champion of dementia inclusion. And I'm very grateful to Pat and Al for being co-authors with me on this adventure. And so thank you. They very much have helped to shape many of the ideas I'll be sharing with you today. So when most of us start in the field of healthcare or even long-term care, dementia care, we were taught the Hippocratic Oath, rule number one, do no harm, right? Most of us get into this field because we are very caring people. We care about the well-being of people living with dementia. We care about family care partners, and none of us want to do harm. That's why it was kind of interesting. 15 years ago, I read this book by Bartlett and O'Connor, Broadening the Dementia Debate Towards Social Citizenship, a wonderful book from scholars based in the UK. And Bartlett and O'Connor had a sentence in their book that just kind of stopped me in my tracks and caused some deep personal reflection. They said oppressive and discriminatory practices in the field of dementia care and support often have their foothold in the well-meaning, well-intentioned ideas of those least intending to do harm. And when I read those words, it made me think of myself. I do not intend to do harm, but thank goodness my practice in dementia care continues to evolve as I continue to learn more and more. A friend of mine who lived and died with dementia, tremendous self-advocate, Dr. Richard Taylor, he said, we are, I believe, disabled as a consequence of misconceptions of dementia and the fears these misconceptions create. Richard thought that, dementia is hard to live with, but he said most of the suffering and disability that he experienced came from the social judgments about his dementia made by others, and that people were pretty quick to want to strip away his rights. And so thank you, Richard, for sharing your story and your wisdom with us. They have stuck with me for many, many years. All right, so I love this quote by Maya Angelou, and I just want to set the stage with this quote because we're going to talk a little bit about memory care. Again, I'm a former operator myself. Maya Angelou said, I did then what I knew how to do, and now that I know better, I do better. So this presentation is not about judgment. It's not about judgment. It is about growth. I believe we are all good people and that the state of knowledge in dementia care continues to evolve. And I, for one, welcome those evolutions because I think they really improve the well-being of people who are living with dementia. A disclosure, like I said, I am a former memory care operator. This is a little collage I put together. It was kind of fun thinking about my practice in the field of dementia care and support, which started in 1984 in the community featured in the top right corner. That's the Arizona Pioneers Home, where I first worked as a nursing home volunteer under the direction of my mother, who was a nurse. They called her Doris Day of the Dementia Ward, and it was a ward back in 1984, I assure you. And so I grew up working in nursing homes, and back in the 90s was really happy and excited to be part of the memory care movement and actually opened the very first memory care community in Washington State, which is that photo in the middle on the right-hand side. And you can see I was literally like the poster child for memory care. That is me in a newspaper advertisement trying to get people to come move into memory care. And so this has been a long journey of learning and unlearning. And I just think it's important to tell you all that because there's nothing I'm critiquing today that I have not done myself. In 2016, I became a family care partner when my dad, I'm lucky I have two dads, actually three if you count my father-in-law, but my stepfather was diagnosed with vascular dementia and Lewy body dementia back in 2016. And so after decades of being a professional care partner, I had the experience to become a family care partner. And I'm very grateful to my dad who lived and died courageously with dementia and helped make the knowledge I want to share today not just professional, but personal. And so know that when I invite you into a space to reflect today, these are spaces where I have reflected both as a professional and as a family care partner. And so thank you to my late dad. Let's start with this reflection. Okay, some of you might be memory care operators. Some of you maybe work in skilled nursing. Maybe you have a separate dementia care neighborhood in your community. But here's a good question for all of us to consider. What are your answers to? When does a person living with dementia require a secured environment? Who should make this decision? And based on what criteria? Just give you a moment to think on your answers to those questions. When I was working in memory care in Washington State, I remember the first time that I really kind of stopped to reflect on the memory care model was when a resident who had been forcibly moved into the community, um, she was trying to get out the door. And of course, it was secured. And, if you push on it long enough, it would eventually open, but not without all the bells and buzzers. And it had a keypad. And this resident, her name was Margaret, she looked at me and she said, "What right do you have to keep me in this place? What right do you have?" And I just want to be honest with all of you. If you're having a hard time answering these questions, so did I. I mean, I had no idea what right I had to keep an adult behind the locked doors of memory care against their will. Today, I know exactly how to answer these questions, and I hope by the end of this presentation, you will too. So here's another reflection. This time we're going to use the chat box. This is an evaluation for placement in a secured environment, i.e. memory care. It came from a provider organization here in the great state of Nevada, your neighbors. And, the ombudsman, our state ombudsman shared this with me. And she wanted to know if I thought this was a sufficient evaluation to determine a move into a secured environment. Why or why not? So let me pose that question to all of you and just pause for a moment so you can look at it, check it out, respond in the chat box. Is this a sufficient evaluation to put a person behind the locked doors of memory care for the rest of their life? Why or why not? And Kim, if you see a couple of responses and want to share a few, that would be awesome.
Will do. I think everybody is just a little bit shy to begin with.
Well, sure.
So we want to encourage you to put your thoughts into the chat box to share with our speaker today and
And
with
please
everyone else.
go. Again, everyone, I so can relate to that. I had
Yeah.
no, if had I not been writing a book on this topic, I'm not sure I could have answered this question.
So we do have a couple of comments. One person says, no, definitely not long-term slash permanent. And another person said, no, more information needed, not just a checkoff list. And then, no, not wandering or inappropriate behavior. And no way, Jose, not thorough, no details.
Oh yeah, you see, you all are way more knowledgeable and insightful than I was back when I was working in memory care. So we're gonna keep coming back to this evaluation. I'm gonna share these human rights frameworks with you, and we're gonna use these frameworks to answer this question together. So hopefully by the end of our hour together, you'll feel really confident in sharing your response here. Okay. Um, all right, the first framework I want to offer to you comes from Bouchard and Kinderman. This was a framework developed in 2019. I absolutely love it. It's called the FRIDA Principles of Human Rights in Dementia Practice. FRIDA is an acronym. It stands for fairness, respect, equality, identity, dignity, and autonomy. And I remember when I first read this journal article back in 2019, I was really excited because as a family care partner, it gave me a framework for really reflecting on the extent to which I, as a daughter, was supporting my dad's human rights. And so know that I have absolutely put this framework to the test in my own life, in the life of my dad. I've shared it with my family, and it's a very helpful framework for reflecting on our practice, whether you are a family care partner or a professional care partner. What I love about this article is that the developers of the Frida principles, they define these principles, but then they create a series of statements written from the perspective of the person living with dementia, so first person perspective, to help us really understand their essence. And so as I'm reading these statements, know that this is a reflection framework that you can use with the people living with dementia whom you support to know whether or not we're doing all that we can to support their rights. So first, let's look at fairness. To what extent would the person living with dementia agree with these statements? Do not make assumptions about me. Give me time and space. Do not exclude me because of my dementia. Those are statements about fairness. How about respect? Listen to me. Find out what is important to me. Make positive efforts to know me. Speak to me, not to my family care partner. Speak to me. Equality. Give me input into my own care. Respect my culture, race, and religion. I have the right to intimate relationships. I have the right to vote. Those are statements about equality. Identity. Respect my personhood. Recognize my skills and talents. Respect my choices about how I want to live my life. How about dignity? Do not embarrass me. Ask for my opinion. Do not patronize me. If you are helping me, explain what you are doing. And then finally, autonomy. Give me the freedom to do what I want, which may include taking risks. Help me make decisions for myself. Give me advice, but don't try to control me. So, Frida principles. Now, thinking about these statements, let's go back to that evaluation for placement in a secured environment. And when I read the Frida principles in these statements, it makes me wonder to what extent would this person, who, by the way, was moved into a memory care neighborhood within an assisted living, to what extent would this resident agree or disagree that these statements were upheld? Do not exclude me because of my dementia. So we can talk about exclusion in terms of putting people in a segregated living area. That's exclusion. Also, on this evaluation, to what extent was the person living with dementia included, right? How did the people who made this decision go about finding out what's important to me, to the resident? Where is the resident's input into their own care demonstrated or documented on this evaluation for placement? How is this community or physician demonstrating that they respect this individual's choices about how they want to live their life? And I love that last statement. Give me the freedom to do what I want, which may include taking risks. Did this person move into this memory care setting because they wanted to, or was it an act of protection? Again, the most oppressive and discriminatory practices often have their foothold in the well-meaning, well-intentioned ideas of those least intending to do harm. But what we can see based on the Frida principles is that this evaluation probably not sufficient, right? Probably not sufficient. I'm going to give you another framework for reflection. This one comes from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, often referred to just as an acronym CRPD. You may hear that from time to time. This is an international human rights treaty that protects and promotes the rights of people with disabilities. Dementia, by the way, is a cognitive disability. And so this human rights treaty absolutely can serve as a benchmark for the human rights-based practices in dementia services globally. So dementia is a cognitive disability. That also means that people living with dementia have protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which is why the CRPD is not ratified in the United States, because here we have the ADA and they seek to achieve similar protections, right? But what I like about the CRPD is, well, actually, oh, forgot I have a poll question. Let me pause for a poll question here before I tell you what I really like and find useful about the CRPD.
Okay, everybody, here's your first poll question. Please answer quickly. The CRPD is an international human rights treaty that protects and promotes the rights of persons with disabilities. Is that true or false? Everybody go ahead and answer quickly. Again, if you have any problem manipulating the poll, you can put your answer into the chat. One more time, the CRPD is an international human rights treaty that protects and promotes the rights of persons with disabilities. And it looks like we are getting close to getting 100% participation. So why don't we go ahead and release the results? And it looks like everybody got that right. So that's fantastic. Thank you. And back to you, Dr. Carson.
All right, thank you. So the CRPD, sorry, let me close that window. The CRPD calls for recognizing persons living with disabilities, including dementia, as active citizens with rights and capable of making decisions in their lives based on their free and informed consent. It calls for a paradigm shift to no longer view people living with dementia from a biomedical model or people living with disabilities, including dementia, from a biomedical model, but from a human rights perspective. And it offers us another framework for reflection. This framework is the CRPD principles, which include capacity assessment, information disclosure, stakeholders' involvement in decision making, respecting needs and preferences, holistic approaches in care practice, and protection against abuse, neglect, and discrimination. And so, again, we're going to explore each one of these principles, and then we'll come back to that assessment again and to say, hey, is this sufficient? And I think, again, you will find that that assessment is not sufficient, but now you'll have some frameworks to really justify an informed response as you're advocating for the rights of people living with dementia to others. So first, let's talk about capacity assessment. What is it? How is it different from a cognitive screen, a cognitive assessment, or a competency evaluation? I remember when I worked in memory care, somebody who has someone's durable power of attorney would probably come in advance and they'd bring me a person's list of diagnoses, something that we called like a face sheet. And if a person had a diagnosis of dementia as one of their diagnoses and they had a durable power of attorney, then we thought, okay, sure, this person can come and live in this memory care community. What I didn't know then that I know now is that dementia is not a diagnosis. If somebody has a diagnosis of dementia, it's not a real diagnosis, right? It means they probably haven't had a comprehensive cognitive assessment, which is a diagnostic assessment. That is what is commonly used to understand what the cause of dementia is. And as many of you know, there's over 130 different causes. But having a dementia diagnosis or a diagnosis specifically of dementia is kind of I don't know, it's a hint that a person may not have had a comprehensive cognitive assessment. Cognitive screens are just that, it's a screen for referral, right? It says this person might have some cognitive issues and we need to try to understand what the heck is going on. So back in the 90s, I didn't know the difference. And very few people were getting really good comprehensive cognitive assessments. And so I just cringe to think of all of the people who moved into memory care where I worked who didn't even have a real diagnosis. They simply had a cognitive screen performed by a nurse, a primary care provider, a social worker. And what I also saw in memory care were some residents who, after moving in, moved out because they didn't actually have dementia. They had delirium or they had depression. And once we were able to get them on solid ground, their cognition improved and they moved out. So some people think that a comprehensive cognitive assessment is sufficient to move somebody into memory care for the rest of their lives against their will. That is false. That is false. Comprehensive cognitive assessments are really important, very important, and they should be performed only by qualified providers. And it may become part of a capacity assessment, but it is not the same as a capacity assessment. A capacity assessment is performed by a clinician with capacity assessment training. Okay, it's a special training, and this person evaluates the individual's ability to make a specific ability a specific decision at a specific time. Okay, so they're looking at this person's decision-making ability and if they have the capacity to make decisions, including perhaps a decision about where to live, right? And there's other decision-making contexts listed here as well. But even a capacity assessment alone is not sufficient to move a person into memory care against their will. It can help inform a guardianship process. Okay, let's look at a guardianship process only happens by a judge. It is a legal judgment. So what would happen is that the judge would, take that capacity assessment and then determine whether or not that individual can manage their own affairs. So this is a legal judgment. And this is what would be required if a person does not want to move into memory care legally. So a judge is the only person who can legally declare an individual as incompetent, and that judgment might result in either a full or limited guardianship. And as you will hear today, there are only two people who have the legal right to make the judgment about whether or not a person should reside in a locked and segregated memory care setting, the person themselves or a court-appointed guardian. So I really hate to think of all the people who are currently unlawfully confined in memory care without any due process of law. I think the issue is pretty widespread, so don't panic if I just said something that makes you feel uncomfortable. I think it makes most providers feel uncomfortable. So poll question number 2.
Okay. A capacity assessment must be completed by a qualified clinician. Is that true or false, audience? Once again, a capacity assessment must be completed by a qualified clinician. Go ahead and enter your responses quickly so that we can get back to Dr. Carson. We'll give it just another second or two. A capacity assessment must be completed by a qualified clinician. Okay, and it looks like we did very well on that one as well. So congratulations, audience, and we'll get back to you, Dr. Carson.
I love that. That is such a good takeaway too. Think about how many people currently reside in memory care against their will who do not have a capacity assessment, let alone a competency evaluation performed by a court, right? Performed by a judge. So capacity assessment, really important. That's one of the CRPD principles. The next principle is information disclosure. Okay, think about that assessment I shared with you from Nevada. To what extent was this person informed that behind the scenes, the administrator, the family, and the physician were making decisions about this person's life without them, and they moved this person into memory care against their will? Information disclosure means you're having conversations, proactive conversations with people. You're helping them understand, well, what was the outcome of my capacity assessment? What was the outcome of my comprehensive cognitive assessment? Do you know, this was a number of years ago, did you know that only 34% of providers disclose that they suspect a dementia-related diagnosis to their patients upon performing a cognitive screen? So there's not a heck of a lot of information disclosure going on in the field of dementia care, and this is a violation of an individual's rights. When I worked in memory care, I could tell you how many times we did the old, I call it the bait and switch, and I bet you know what I'm talking about, where a loving family would bring their mom into the community where I worked for lunch with us, right? For lunch. And we'd sit down, we have a lovely lunch. But what the person didn't know is that prior to their lovely lunch, their family was here setting up their room. And while the family is going to depart after lunch, the individual living with dementia will not be departing after lunch. I call that the bait and switch. And I'll tell you what, I stopped doing that a long time ago. I don't think there is anything therapeutic about lying to a person who's living with dementia. And the CRPD would agree, right? People have the right to information disclosure, the right to information disclosure. Now let's look briefly at stakeholders' involvement in decision making. And to help illuminate this particular principle, I want to point out a couple of some federal regulations that tell us very clearly what rights people living with dementia have within long-term care settings. First, there's the right to self-determination. And again, you could look these up through CMS, the Department of Health and Human Services. The right to self-determination says that the residents have the right to make informed decisions about their care and to participate in care planning. And that includes the choice about whether or not to move into memory care. Here's another right clearly articulated: the right to be free from interference when exercising one's rights. That's right. This right protects residents from coercion, from retaliation, and from restrictions when asserting their legal rights. So when somebody says to me, Jennifer, open this door, let me out of this place, if they don't want to be there and there's not a court-appointed guardian determining that they have to be there, then you know what? That person has a right for me to open the door and to let them out. Hopefully, I would do that with support, right? And maybe go with the person. But I'm just letting you know very clearly that people have the right to be free from restrictions in exercising their right if they do not have a court-appointed guardian and have not been legally declared incompetent. So in the case of a resident, a judgment of incompetence, under the laws of a state, the court-appointed resident representative, i.e. the guardian, exercises the resident's right to the extent necessary in accordance with the state law. But even the court-appointed guardian must actually take into consideration the resident's wishes and preferences, right? They must be considered. And to the extent practicable, the resident must be provided with opportunities to participate in the care planning process. In other words, no bait and switch. No bait and switch. Okay, those are federal regulations. So one of the things that I've done as a care partner, professional care partner and family care partner, is just commit to a nothing about us without us approach in everything I do. Nothing about us without us. If you're going to engage in decision making, make sure to include the most important person, who is the person living with dementia. Nothing about us without us. When I was a doctoral student, I had an opportunity to work on a research project led by Dr. Sherry Dupuy out of the University of Waterloo in Ontario, where we worked in partnership with people living with dementia to understand principles and enablers that support care partners in working in not tokenistic partnerships, but authentic partnerships with people living with dementia. And so this framework, which was published in the Journal of Dementia, offers some reflective questions that care partners can use with people living with dementia to ensure that when we say that we're really going to partner and include people living with dementia in decision making, that we're doing a good job of that, and that our efforts aren't tokenism. Nobody likes tokenism. Don't just invite me to the table of my care plan and think that that satisfies this principle. It does not, right? And so this helps us think about all of the different enablers that we have to thoughtfully put into place in order to support a person living with dementia being engaged genuinely in their own decision making. When we partner genuinely with people living with dementia, we go from just supporting personhood, which is a worthy goal. And you can see the different domains of personhood there in the left-hand side of the table. Instead of just personhood, partnerships help us promote active citizenship within the context of dementia. And so instead of comfort, we support growth. Instead of just supporting a person's identity, we help them have social position. Instead of just keeping them occupied or busy, we help people connect with a genuine purpose. Instead of just being included at the table, partnerships really help support genuine participation. Instead of just helping people living with dementia feel attachment, we help them experience solidarity and love. Of course, love is, very worthwhile aim. Everyone should experience love, give love, receive love. But what people living with dementia say they really want is freedom from discrimination. Partnerships help us do that. The next principle respecting needs and preferences. The idea here, folks, is to get upstream and to be proactive in honoring an individual's needs and preferences. When we are not proactive, bad things happen, right? Downstream. And we end up having to go rescue people living with dementia who are now in distress because we have not respected their needs and preferences. It really kind of irks me that so many people label these expressions of distress as symptoms of dementia. The research shows us very clearly that yes, while there are some behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, like my dad, if he had hallucinations, that was very much a part of his Lewy body. Apathy, very much a part of his Lewy body, right? But if I did not respect my dad's needs and preferences and he was communicating distress to me, how awful if I just simply labeled that as a symptom of dementia, which means that I would no longer seek to satisfy my dad's needs and preferences. I'm just going to blame the expression of distress on the pathology of my dad's dementia instead of asking myself questions that can help me to get back upstream. Christine Bryden, an incredible self-advocate living with dementia, said, look, professional care partners, you love your crappy acronym BPSD so much. Keep it, let you keep that dumb acronym, but let's call it what it really is: basic personal signs of distress. You are not respecting my needs or preferences. I have fallen into the river. I'm drowning. I'm doing my very best to communicate with you that something ain't working here. If you just simply blame it on the pathology of my dementia, then what hope do I have that you're ever going to rescue me out this river and that we're going to get back upstream? And what we all know, we know this. These are just, a handful of causes of distress that I came up with. There are many others. There are many different sources of distress beyond the dementia itself. Having an unmet need when people don't respect your needs or preferences causes distress. A care partner response when they just take over, they make all the decisions, they silence the person living with dementia, that causes distress. Of course, communication challenges cause distress. Threats to personhood, autonomy, and freedom, like feeling like you're locked in, causes distress. By the way, there's sufficient evidence that locked doors are a primary cause of distress within residential care settings. And so, imagine how you would feel if you couldn't assert your autonomy and your freedom. It would be very distressing. People living with dementia are people, and they have the same needs for autonomy and freedom as anyone else. So there's lots of different things happening that are causing distress among people living with dementia. So the whole idea is for us to be proactive in supporting the well-being of people living with dementia so that they don't fall into the river and need to be rescued, right? So this is a framework that I use to reflect on well-being within the context of dementia. It's one that I had the opportunity to develop in partnership with people living with dementia. They served as research partners on this particular research project. And we went out and we interviewed over 200 people living with dementia to ask what helps support their well-being within the context of dementia. My partners living with dementia helped me analyze the data. And what you see here is this beautiful graphic of meaningful experiences. This is what my partners living with dementia called these 7 meaningful experiences. I sometimes just refer to these as domains of well-being when I'm teaching. But people living with dementia said, when you're diagnosed with dementia, it's like living in the eye of a storm. You can see the eye of the storm right here, right in this picture. They said, but as long as we have opportunities to stay connected to these 7 meaningful experiences on a regular basis, we can live well with dementia. I love that. So ever since 2012, when I worked on this research project, I have used this framework to help me really have conversations with people living with dementia about their needs and preferences and to work upstream, right, to create opportunities that help support these needs. I think of these, thanks to my friend Al Power, as glasses. 7 domains, 7 glasses. I actually have an assessment with these cups on it. And I ask people living with dementia, to what extent is your glass full or empty when it comes to each of these 7 domains. The good news is that each glass is refillable. So if we have missed the boat and the glass is empty, it's not too late to fill it. And the best ideas for how to refill that glass are going to come directly from the person who's living with dementia. Okay, so that's our primary goal. Everyone's primary goal is supporting the well-being of people living with dementia. The next principle of the CRPD's holistic approaches in care practice. People have a right to holistic approaches in care practice. What does this mean? Well, in memory care settings, it means that we should be looking for provider organizations that are holistic in their approaches, not just a locked door, right? Which, by the way, is the only thing that memory care communities have in common across our country, because there's really no standard for what constitutes memory care beyond the locked door. But people living with dementia who choose to live in memory care or who are placed there by a court-appointed guardian have the right to holistic approaches. This could be person-centered care, person-directed care. I personally really like the relationship-centered dementia care framework. And so when I go and check out memory care communities or any long-term care community, I'm looking to see, does this provider offer a holistic approach in their care practice? This framework was developed by Mike Nolan and colleagues in the UK. It's kind of like person-centered care. The difference is that it recognizes that everyone in the context of care support needs to have their personhood affirmed or their needs affirmed, not just the person living with dementia, and that care and well-being are reciprocal experiences. And so everyone in the context of care and support needs to have a sense of security, continuity, belonging, purpose, achievement, and significance. That's when optimal dementia care and support can be provided. So I really love this framework, whatever framework you really value. I think it's important to know that people living with dementia have a right to holistic approaches. One of the things I look for, by the way, in memory care settings is dedicated care assignments, because I do care very much about relationship-centered care. And if we have dedicated care assignments, same care partners supporting the same people living with dementia, we know that they're developing those reciprocal relationships, easier for the people living with dementia to then recognize their care partners, which builds trust. Of course, trust is really important when we're talking about personal and intimate care. But what I love about dedicated assignments is that it supports these proactive approaches I was talking about to recognizing needs and to communicating beyond words. This leads to earlier recognition of illness and other emerging problems, higher levels of trust among family members as well. And you don't have to look that far back, just the COVID pandemic, to see better outcomes in terms of infection control when providers are committed to dedicated care assignments. And then the last principle, very important, protection against abuse, neglect, and discrimination. And for this one, I really do just want to center our conversation on how every person living with dementia has rights, because every human, by virtue of being human, has rights, right? The California Association for Nursing Home Reform developed a wonderful guide for long-term care called Your Right to Leave Guide. And as I was writing this book chapter on human rights for our book, I learned a lot from Tony Chicotel, who's an attorney with Canner. I'm really grateful for their leadership in this space. This is a free downloadable guide. I just want to put on all of your radar. And Canner says, it's a quote, that all adults have the right to move freely and to choose where they want to live and whether or not to receive healthcare services. Someone has a right to turn down healthcare services. When someone goes to a long-term care facility, they do not leave their rights at the door. They have every right not to be imprisoned, even if someone like a doctor or an administrator believes the resident does not have the capacity to make sound decisions. Okay, you can't make assumptions about capacity. It has to be an actual assessment. And then, again, there is only one person who can restrict a resident's right to leave long-term care facility, a court-appointed conservator or guardian acting with specific authority to place the resident in a locked facility against the resident's will. This was actually upheld in 2015 by the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. That's the agency in charge of federal nursing home rules. And they held that nursing home residents may not be confined against their will, even if a power of attorney has consented. So straight from the mouth of CMS, folks, right? Straight from the Department of Health and Human Services. Otherwise, and I quote the Department of Health and Human Services, nursing facilities can be turned into prisons in which family members lock their relatives away purely for the sake of convenience. Residents of nursing facilities have rights, and those rights include the right to freedom of movement. This is a right. Well, one provider challenged this right, and there was a case, NMS Healthcare of Hagerstown versus CMS, and this case went before the CMS Appeals Board. And the board fined the provider almost $400,000, which was about $5,600 per day for every day that a resident was confined against their will in a locked unit, even though they had the consent of the daughter who was the POA. All right, our last poll question.
Okay. It is in 2015, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services held that nursing home residents may not be confined against their will, even if the power of attorney agent has consented. So everyone go ahead and quickly select your response. And once again, in 2015, Federal Department of Health and Human Services held that nursing home residents may not be confined against their will, even if the power of attorney agent has consented. And it looks like the vast majority of folks got this right. So good job, everyone. And back to you, Dr. Carson.
Thank you. I want to offer a resource. You can download this with a quick internet search as well. It is in the Nevada State Plan to address Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. When we first wrote it, it was recommendation 17 in our state plan. We have a new iteration of our state plan, and now it's recommendation 10. But both state plans are available online. But it's our previous state plan that really has some great narrative to help support all of you in your advocacy efforts. And this recommendation is about supporting the right to choice in care and care setting. And in our state plan, which you could get from a Google search again, we clearly spell out, I'm on the task force, we clearly spell out how the US Constitution supports this right. It says very clearly, liberty interests may not be deprived without due process of law. We clearly spell out how this right is further supported by the 1999 Supreme Court Olmstead versus LC decision, which says that the medically unjustifiable institutionalization of persons living with disabilities constitutes a violation of the ADA. And then we very clearly spell out key nursing home and assisted living resident rights, both at the federal and state level. And so I'm just going to end with a couple of quick excerpts here to whet your appetite. Maybe go download this document. Increasingly locked and segregated dementia care is being challenged as a potential violation of a person's human rights and civil liberties. People living with dementia have the right to choose their own care and living environment and should remain free of forced placement. Holding a power of attorney over someone does not grant the legal authority to place an adult in a locked environment, even if that adult has a dementia-related diagnosis. There's also no legal authority for physicians to confine residents, no legal authority giving long-term care providers the ability to hold residents against their will. By law, there are only two people with the authority to consent to an individual's placement in a locked dementia care setting, the individual themselves and a court-appointed guardian. The U.S. Constitution provides a right of privacy and guarantee that liberty interests may not be deprived without due process of law. Unfortunately, unjustly, and perhaps unwittingly, under this standard, long-term care communities across the United States may be committing false imprisonment. While the right to move freely is well established under general legal principles, there are also a variety of federal and state laws that enhance the general rules, including the right to self-determination, the right to free choice in determining treatment, the right to refuse treatment, to be informed of the consequences of that refusal, the right to be free from restraint, including environmental restraint, the right to be considerate and respectful of care, and the right to be free from interference in exercising one's right. Furthermore, people living with dementia have the right to live and receive care and support in the least restrictive environment. The Supreme Court 1999 Olmstead decision asserts that the medically unjustifiable institutionalization of persons with disabilities constitutes a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So is this evaluation sufficient to determine a move into a secured environment? Heck no. It is no, absolutely not. By the way, the state ombudsman was very successful in moving this person out of the secured memory care environment and into a less restrictive housing alternative. I'm going to conclude with a brief poem. It was funny, I was writing part of my book chapter on this subject, and there was one section, didn't start out as a poem, but it kind of turned into one. So I'll call it a poem. I'm calling this poem, Let Freedom Ring. Freedom is not defined by the absence of challenge, but by the presence of possibility. It dwells in the right to choose where and with whom we live, the right to move unrestrained, the right to pursue aspirations, take risks, and even make mistakes, and the right to receive support in ways that honor our personhood. Freedom is essential to well-being regardless of one's cognitive ability. It is not granted by others nor earned by perfection. It is born of dignity, the dignity of being human and preserved by courage. It is therefore a birthright legacy and responsibility. Let's build a world where freedom is not feared, but fiercely nurtured. A world where all are free to be fully and gloriously human, and yes, vulnerable and interdependent. Let's build a culture of dementia that is not a shadow of this world, but its most radiant embodiment. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you all. We do have a little time for questions, and know that even after 12:30, I'm happy to hang out with anyone who wants further dialogue. And Kim and Lauren very kindly offered to share 2 flyers in the chat box with all of you. These are free resources and opportunities that come from the Dementia Engagement Education Research Program at the University of Nevada, Reno. The first is a dementia self-management guidebook available for free download, a guidebook written by people living with dementia, for people living with dementia, pictured here. It's an incredible resource. And then a comprehensive 12-hour 4-module dementia care training for family and professional care partners called the Dear Care Partner Training. I will be your tour guide for this upcoming training, April 30th, May 1st, 7th, and 8th. It's on Zoom. If you can imagine having to listen to me for 3 hours at a time on Zoom, but it is a really engaging training. So I hope you might consider it, or at least just share this opportunity with folks. All right. Kim, I hope
Great.
I have a little bit of time for some Q&A.
We do, but I do have some announcements that I need to make in case people do need to leave. One is, of course, I want to thank you just so much for that valuable topic and useful information. And I think anyone here would agree that they would love to have 3 hours of training with you. That would be very insightful. I share this message at all of our webinars, but it's especially poignant today. We want to remind everyone of the importance of being aware of implicit biases, or otherwise known as unconscious stereotypes, as we care for others. A best practice is a person-centered approach where we view each person that we care for as an individual with unique needs and preferences. We treat them with dignity and respect, even when they're very different from ourselves. If we always listen carefully and respectfully so that we understand their perspectives, values, and preferences, we can build trust and provide the very highest level of care. So everybody, you should be writing your questions in the chat box at this time. before I go in there and start sharing those questions with Dr. Carson, I do want to take the time to thank our sponsors once again for making this presentation possible. So we thank you, O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, and Caring Companions at Home. Please don't forget about next month's webinar. Save the date for Tuesday, May 13th. Our own Patty Barnett Mouton will be the speaker, and she's going to be talking about the pulse form, what it is and how to use it. Also, any other education that you're interested in is on our website at www.alzoc.org. So, okay, so let me get into the question box here. Um, An early question was the capacity to consent is tenuous because the capacity at one moment could be forgotten and the understanding of the decision lost. So the question is, how is this respected and honored, Dr. Carson?
Ah, that's such a good question. And I wish I was had more expertise in terms of the capacity assessment process, but I'm not a qualified or trained clinician when it comes to capacity assessments. And so please forgive me that I don't want to provide misinformation.
Okay.
That's a really great question, though.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carson. Um, A comment, not a question. Nothing about us without us could be a relevant sign at current demonstrations. All of us are being threatened with being ignored about everything important. So we can all kind of relate to this topic. Let's see.
I had just have to mention that when I wrote that little thing about freedom, um, it was kind of like a meta kind of experience for me because it felt relevant for current social critique as well. So
Absolutely. Okay, a comment. Oh, actually, someone is quoting Dr. Power. I recognize this quote well. What is commonly seen as confused or challenging behavior is actually compensatory or adaptive behavior by an individual who continues to express agency and purpose in their own unique way.
love it.
A wonderful quote by Dr. Al Power.
Love Al.
What's the fine line of allowing the loved one to participate for the sake of including them in the decision with the possibility of further confusing them with details they're unable to comprehend?
That is such a wonderful and insightful question. And as a family care partner, know that I navigated that line often. And sometimes, like for driving, for instance. My brother and I'd invite our dad to the kitchen table and we'd have family meetings and we'd talk about important things with our dad and we would make decisions together. And as my dad's dementia progressed, it definitely changed the way in which we presented information and choices. Always make sure that we're presenting choices. As my dad's dementia progressed, the categories of choice might have been a little more simplified, but there were always choices and always communication. I can tell you though that sometimes my dad would come back after the fact, like after we sold his truck. I remember my dad coming up to my brother and I, he's quite upset. And I said, Dad, what's going on? What's wrong? He said, you guys are making decisions without me. You guys sold my truck. My dad didn't remember that we had a discussion as a family about when to sell his truck. And he was really hurt by thinking that he had been excluded. And in that moment, I could have said, what are you talking about, Dad? Of course we included you. That's one of my core values. Like, of course but that wouldn't have been an appropriate or kind response. I think it's always more important to be kind than to be correct. And so I said, Dad, I am so sorry that you feel we're not engaging you in the decisions that impact your life, these big decisions. What can I do to do a better job? How can I do this better? because I want you to know that your decision is the one that matters most.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I guess you could even get some of this in writing, right? The person could
Yeah,
sign off, I agree to sell the car. I don't know.
yeah, it's hard. And then
It's
confronting
hard. All of this is
people about
hard to navigate.
it.
It really is.
And confronting
Um,
people
a
with
pardon?
oh, and just and confronting people with a reality that may not be their reality was we just so instead I just was apologetic and in that moment would endeavor to do better and to help my dad to feel validated and to help him to
Yeah,
I'm committed. And
you're absolutely right.
it was, and it is a fine line. It's a line that is negotiated every day
Yeah,
and where care partners have to make judgments and consider how much of this, how many details do we include in this conversation, or how can we help simplify this? Yeah.
absolutely. Another comment on BPSD. So true. Had a resident living in Illinois and the director would not listen to her, often dismissed her, told her she did not have time for her. This resident would come and speak with me. I was the director of life enrichment, and I was able to determine what she was looking for and asking for help with. So, Kathleen, you raised your hand. If you have a question, you can just put that right into the chat. Let's see. Please mention permanence of capacity or lack thereof.
Yeah, as I understand it, let me offer that caveat, is that capacity is assessed for specific decisions at specific points in time. It's not a global assessment. And so I don't think there is permanence of a capacity assessment. And so, for instance, if somebody had a stroke, maybe their cognition is significantly impaired, and then maybe they go through some rehabilitation, they're able to regain some cognitive ability, their capacity then might change, which is why I think they say capacity is for specific decisions at specific times. But the competency then is the more global judgment.